Wonderful to be back together this morning, thinking about this theme of hospitality, which is a theme of welcoming and what we're called to do together as Christians. Let's see, Blake, can you go back to just the one that says like hospitality, the talk with, yeah. So last night we looked at this image by Andrei Rublev, a 15th century icon, thinking about our place as we view that image, that we're being enfolded into that circle, that divine circle of friendship with the Lord, and that we first receive hospitality from him. So before we can think of being hospitable to anyone, we need to be in that posture where we understand that we're part of that circle. We've been welcomed in. The way has been made for us to be in the divine presence. So that's our first starting place of hospitality. Last night we talked about how that removes any sense of pretension that we may have in our hospitality, that we have things all pulled together and we're presenting something to someone. And it also removes any feeling of like inferiority, that you don't have everything pulled together, and that you're making excuses for not having people welcomed into your life. So that divine circle is really important for us to remember our place in it, that we've been welcomed in, and because we've been welcomed in, we can welcome in others. And that's the posture that we have for hospitality. So then, like, we can change to that, have all the images the same, which we'll start this morning off with an image of the story in Jesus' life where he was at the home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And this is a painting by a Spanish painter, Diego Velázquez. And I think that this sets us up well for thinking about hospitality. Because ultimately, hospitality is about relationships. And I think that we can all figure out where Mary is in this painting and where Martha is in this painting. So, and then there is this other figure of this older woman making sure that it's pointed out of who's who. So we see, yep, so she's pointing at Martha there in the foreground, and Martha's making an aioli. To go with the fish, and it looks like she's unhappy about it, just a little bit. Now, in this painting, it's kind of fun where that what we see in the background of Mary at the feet of Jesus, again with that older woman pointing her out. It could be through an open window, or it could be even a painting in the home of the woman who's making the aioli. So, but we get that glimpse in the background where Mary has chosen the better way, and it will not be taken from her, that she is sitting at the feet of Jesus, and she's in that relationship with him. Not that Martha's work of preparing a meal is bad in and of itself, but the order of its importance has been forgotten. That the most important is that relationship that's happening through that little vignette we see in the open window. So we want to be thinking about hospitality this morning, of welcoming in our guests. And so that is not so much about the food we serve or what we do to prepare, it's about the relationship. And hospitality is a spiritual practice. So like prayer is a spiritual practice. We practice prayer. We get better at it. We learn how to pray throughout our lives as Christians. Hospitality is in the same way. It's a spiritual practice. And so we'll be looking at two passages today. One we read in Romans, just that line, seek to show hospitality, which comes in the long list of how do we behave as Christians? How do we act together in a Christian way? That line, seek to show hospitality. Also in 1 Peter 4 is another section where it's a list by Peter of how do we act as Christians. And that one says, practice hospitality without grumbling. So we'll be talking about that today too. But practicing hospitality, to practice it, to be a spiritual practice means that you can get better at it. So wherever your starting point is now, if you grew up in a family that was really welcoming to everyone, or you didn't grow up in a family like that, or you've had a family where you've invited a lot of people into your lives and had people coming in and out of your lives, or you haven't had that. The starting place doesn't matter so much as the fact that we can all practice this and get better at it. So I'll be thinking today about practicing hospitality. But when we do that, practicing hospitality is for the purpose of relationship. It's welcoming in another into our lives. And your life might feel like, I have a lot of people in my life. I don't know if I can welcome in anyone else. You can. Let's just note that right now. There's a little bit more space. There's more space to welcome in others. Because this is a spiritual practice, it also comes with God's grace. And we know in that divine circle, that image, there's always room for more. So there's room for more in your life too. So we also talked last night about how Christ comes to us in the form of strangers, those who are in need of a drink, those who are in need of clothing. We may recognize those people, we may not. We may have a long-term relationship with those people Christ brings into our lives. It may be only for a short moment. But because we know that Christ is going to be coming to us in the form of strangers, hospitality can start with expectancy. We can expect to be hospitable because Christ is going to come to us, and so that's where we need to start with an expectancy. So imagine that you've been invited over to someone's home for dinner, and you pull up into their driveway, and all of the lights in their house are out. And you think a couple of things. One of the thoughts might be, did I put that into GPS wrong? Is this the right house? You could also think, do I have the right night for dinner? Or was I supposed to come tomorrow night? So you start looking up on your phone an email that talked about what is this the right address? What do I have here? Because you do not want to go up to the door and ring the doorbell of a house that's completely dark, right? It's just an odd feeling. You imagine instead that if someone's expecting you, there'd be a little bit more indication that you could go up to that door. So instead, you send a text like, "Hey, are we on for tonight? Did I get that night right? Did I get the night right?" Not indicating I'm in the driveway. And we basically, when we think about expectation, it's like we can live our lives like where the lights are on, and it's always apparent that there is space and room for someone coming in. And so we need to just think about how Christ may come to us in the form of a neighbor who just lost her husband. Or Christ might come to you in the little body of a third grader who's best friends with your third grader. Or Christ may come to you in the form of your hairdresser who all of a sudden is opening up to you as she is cutting your hair. Christ comes to us in many ways, and so we can expect that. Now, as Romans 12:13 said, we can also seek to show hospitality. We can seek it out. And I find that I like collecting stories of people who seek to show hospitality because I find them very inspiring to me. And one of those stories is from my college days, that there were two college professors married to each other at Wheaton College in Illinois. And every Thursday night, they had any student who was in any of their classes come over to their home for dinner. Then anyone at church and college-age group every Sunday came over to dinner at their house. There was a write-up in the alumni magazine a few years back about this couple saying, "Did you expect to serve 3,000 dinners and lunches?" And no, that expectation was not there. The expectation was to serve one dinner, and then it worked. And they decided, well, that wasn't so hard. Let's do it again next week. And it just went from there and there over almost 40 years of serving meals. It must start somewhere. So you need to seek it out. I find it's really important, sort of do we're still, I feel like, in post-COVID analysis of our lives. Do a post-COVID analysis. What days of the week do you binge watch TV and instead could be thinking about hospitality? Who is missing from your life? Start to seek out hospitality by recognizing those people. In my work with churches, here's a couple of ways that I see that churches could get better at this. When I work with church plants, I find that they tend to rent spaces that are already too small for the hospitality that they need to show. There's not enough chairs in those spaces that they rent. There needs to be this expectation of hospitality, that there is room for more. The other place I see in churches, and you might think about this, is that we expect perhaps visitors, but we don't expect people to be integrated into the body of Christ. We might say that, but we don't give them room. So somebody may have a job leading something at church, setting up communion. And they love that job. They don't mind doing that job. They freely do it every week, but they don't make room, have an expectation that others will want to also lead in doing that job. And so in our churches, we need to make room for more people to be connected into the body, where we each have a function to play, and that other people can be in charge of things, even doing it differently than you. And that's okay. It's a hospitality for us to expand our body, and we should be expecting that. Now, expectation is a great motivator. It's a great motivator to action. And so as we think about hospitality, it is about relationships, but it does help to have some level of preparation. And we may have a lot of time for preparing or a little time. So I just recently read the book called The Day the World Came to Town, which is about 9/11 airplanes that were coming into the United States from international, but they were diverted because international airspace closed down on 9/11. There's also a musical that just came out based on that book, Come From Away, which if you want to watch something on Netflix, maybe invite someone over and watch it on Netflix. It's a really fun musical as well. So this town in Newfoundland, Canada, had just hours to prepare for tripling the size of their community with people that they needed to feed and house. At first, when they got reports that planes were going to be diverted into coming into Newfoundland and landing in Gander, it was only supposed to be for a couple of hours, that people were not even allowed off the planes because the expectation was, they'll be on their way soon. U.S. won't keep airspace closed. Instead, it was 5 days of 7,000 people being in this little town of less than 3,000. And it's an amazing book about their preparation, that within hours they had prepared places for everybody to sleep. Within hours, they had gotten coordinated of how were they going to prepare 7,000 meals 3 times a day. Even things like how are they going to take care of all the animals that were on the plane. The hospitality in that book is just a precious insight into what hospitality looks like. There's one woman who recounts the story of walking into the bathroom at the Legion Center and seeing a whole stack of towels that she recognized must have come from all of the different households. That they were just, randomly assorted, but there with a pile of toothbrushes and everything else people would need. So that book's inspiring because it can show you can have a very short amount of time and still be prepared enough for the hospitality that needs to be extended. So I would, if you want an inspirational book on hospitality, I would definitely recommend that. But as we expect people, we get better at preparing. So Lottie, my daughter, is here with me today. She can attest that oftentimes on the drive home from church, people will get assignments like, hey, we're having somebody over after church. Somebody needs to wipe off the dining room table that didn't get wiped off. Somebody needs to go downstairs and get a jar of spaghetti sauce because we now are having people over. You don't need a long time to prepare, but you do need to prepare. I think that that's what the parable, one of the things in the parable of the wise and foolish virgins shows, that it was not only their expectation that the bridegroom was coming, but the wise virgins also were prepared in bringing extra oil. So as we think about hospitality, we can ask the Lord, just help us know what to do to prepare. I want to share two stories about pancakes that this has been like once one of the influencing stories in my life for hospitality. So when I was 8 years old, my mom was turning 35, and I wanted to give a surprise party for my mom. And so I enlisted my dad's permission and help on that, and I organized with the neighbors that somebody was going to bring a plate of sandwiches, and another person was going to bring a veggie tray and chips, and someone was going to make the cake. We were going to have this surprise dinner for my mom. It was a Sunday night. It was from 4:30 to 6:30 we were doing this dinner because we had a Sunday evening church service that started at 7. So we were going to have this surprise party from 4:30 to 6:30. Well, what my dad didn't realize is that I kept buying invitations from the local Ben Franklin to give to people for my mom's birthday party. So with 8 invitations in a package, and I bought 8 packages, so 64 invitations were given out for my mom's birthday party. So her biggest surprise was who was there. She had not expected that. I think she had caught wind that a birthday party was happening, but she was highly surprised at the number of people who showed up at our house. And we didn't have any food. I mean, we didn't have enough food. So I had the neighbors didn't think, oh, wow, there's 100 plus people who are coming. They just made their little plate of sandwiches. So my mom had Bisquick in the cupboard, and she started making silver dollar pancakes. And everyone remembers that evening as the pancake event because everyone was served pancakes. It just expanded, just add a little more water and, and it worked out. And so that was all the preparation needed. Later, so just a couple of years ago, we were at church, and there was a family that was visiting. I didn't know that they were going to be visiting. They're from out of state, former friend or friends from a long time ago. And so I was like, just come over after church, and I'll figure out something. And so I've learned in my life to always have a box of Bisquick because you can always make do with pancakes. So they came and had pancakes that day with us. And just a month ago, I was with the daughter of those friends, and she was sharing the impact on her mom's life of how that changed her understanding of hospitality, that she didn't have to do this big showy thing, that we just had pancakes together and laughed and had a great time, and that's all that was needed. So if you feel like you need to prepare and don't know how, you could start with a box of Bisquick. That would be one place to start. But ultimately, our expectancy of guests coming, seeking to show hospitality, our preparation work is completely unimportant if we are not focused on the relationships. And so I'd like us to think through 3 areas of relationship building that we could be doing as we think about hospitality. So when we think about hospitality, one of the biggest things is we need to think about becoming other aware. Just our awareness of others needs to increase. And if you get, even some people get nervous about having people in their house, what their awareness level starts focusing on is the cleanliness of the bathroom, and if you're going to run out of food, and that's what you become very aware of. Or even within our churches, we can sometimes become very aware of the things that need to be done, and if they're done on time, and if they're done in the right way, and all of that, instead of the other awareness that we need to have for hospitality. So hospitality, as we become more other aware, it tunes us into becoming aware of ourselves too. Like where is something else taking precedence over this relationship? So God uses that to point out in us too. We hosted for several months a young man from Rwanda who came to live with us. He showed up in Minnesota in January. It was bright and sunny outside, and he couldn't believe that you could have sunshine with such extreme cold. It was just a concept just beyond him. But I learned from that experience as he was with us how much I lacked, how much I did not have an other awareness. To really tune into what a total cross-cultural experience he was having. That even how our shower operated was a new and frightful experience, let alone how to work a stove, how to wash clothes, how to catch a bus, how to speak in your fourth language every day, taking classes. All of those things that it was like it slowly dawned on me as he was living there of how difficult and challenging that is. So we can all be in the posture where we're asking the Lord to make us more aware of others. In our family, we had the opportunity to go on a trip to England, which we greatly enjoyed. And one of the things we most enjoyed, well, we enjoyed almost like everything, but the food and the cakes especially were very delicious. And so in the last few years, since our family has had that trip, we host a November 5th bonfire night, which is sort of an English celebration. But for us, it's the excuse to have a lot of pudding and cake and custard and scones and invite people over for that. And so basically the category of who gets invited to that party is anyone who's watched like the Great British Baking Show, has studied in England, has wanted to go to England, just anyone, it's sort of a wide category. If you read British literature or watch BritBox, like you're invited to the party. And we always have shepherd's pie and parkin and sticky toffee pudding and lots of great things. So, but what I've seen happen at that party is sort of blatantly pointed out the last couple of years, the lack of other awareness that we need to have in a hospitable situation. And it's come up at this party, but I've also seen it come up in our church. So I want to point out two areas where I see sort of a lack of other awareness that as church bodies we can change. One of them is a lack of awareness of for people who are unmarried coming into our communities and having all the conversation be about we, or children, about, well, our children are doing this, our children are doing that. Last year at our house was a young couple who have wanted to have children. And instead of our other guests tuning into the fact that this young couple wanted to have children, instead, everything that seemed to be shared was about having children. That really breaks down hospitality when we lack an awareness of others. It's not that we can't talk about those things, but it's understanding that we're welcoming someone else into that divine circle. And in doing so, we need to be thinking through what are our connecting points with them. We found in our parties that we actually need to become more like directive, like, hey, we're going to gather over dinner and we're going to have everyone answer this one question so that we can steer the conversation away from this lack of other awareness. But what would be all the better is if we just grew in an awareness of others and were more hospitable in our conversations. At church, too, when we use phrases like, the Lord really had his hand on this, I was so blessed, those things are true. But depending on who is coming into that conversation, that could really freak them out to hear, oh, the Lord had his hand on me in this situation. Just be aware of where people's starting places are at, because hospitality is all about relationships and welcoming others in. Another place of welcoming others in and building relationships is what Tim Keller calls new front porches. And when I saw this article by him, I'm like, this is perfect. I now have Tim Keller to back up another thing I talk about in church plant training. So this was a recent article from him. He entitled Lemonade on the Porch, The Gospel in a Post-Christendom Society. And he starts the article actually quoting a theologian from the early 1900s, Abraham Kuyper. And Abraham Kuyper uses the metaphor of a forecourt or porch for the church. That Kuyper argued more than 100 years ago, religion no longer occupies the place it used to in social and public life. The atmosphere that at one time was favorable to religion now in fact suppresses it. In the forecourt or porch, religion has been hushed up. And so Keller goes on to say, there's only one solution. The churches in the United States cannot rely on the culture any longer to constitute a church porch. Congregations must build their own church porches, where they can serve lemonade to outsiders who are not yet ready to come all the way into our house, our sanctuary, but where they can be prepared to do so. He goes on to say, how is that done? And he gives 3 ways of how this is done. That people see Christianity on the front porch. It happens when it's modeled in the lives of individual Christians, but it also may consist of visual expressions of Christianity. May that like in service to your community, caring for the poor. People are seeing a visual expression of Christianity, and that's a new front porch. It can happen as well in art, literature, music, theater, or in education. On front porches, Keller says, people must be able to question, ask questions. That's what happens on a front porch. There's dialogue. People can ask questions and be patiently listened to. And then finally, being on a front porch, people are enabled to hear Christianity, but not in the Christian lingo we often use. So I was just recently at GAFCON, and one of the things that was talked about there was a new kind of book series on the book of John that someone developed. And it's these thin little books on the book of John, and the first one is only on the first 18 sentences. They don't use the word verses. They use the word sentences, because as the book of John is being talked about on a front porch, it's no longer using Christian lingo of what is a verse, but instead it has it written out in 18 sentences. And if you want an amazing resource, it's called The Word One, the numbers then, 121. And it's a free resource that's out there on the book of John. It's a fantastic resource. But this is another place of relationship building that we need to be thinking about as people and in our churches. What are our new front porches? Because our American society is even a little wigged out of going into someone's home. So you almost need a front porch before you can even invite them into your home. And so what are those front porches? What are those places where you have a welcoming opportunity in the life of someone? So if you're a parent of young kids, you've got so many built-in front porches because you can bring, snacks to a soccer game, or you can, show up at the school with treats for the teachers. Or if you have a dog, that is a great front porch. So maybe everyone just needs to get a dog because the dog park is a new front porch. I have a coach, a church planting coach, and he always, when he and his wife go to a restaurant, they never sit at a table. They always sit at the bar, because for them, that's the new front porch. And they're connecting with the bartender and the wait staff, but also the people who end up sitting on either side of them. These are the places where you're meeting people in the community, and they're getting exposed to who is a Christian, what's a Christian like. And the conversation might not steer towards Christ automatically, but it's amazing the opportunities God gives where someone might say something and then you have the opportunity to say, I'm a praying person, and if you'd be comfortable me praying for that, I'd love to be able to pray for you for that. That is still actually fairly welcomed in our society. So we can create these front porches. Be thinking about where you might need to be in a front porch. If you don't have that built into your life, think about joining an exercise class or going to a pub trivia night on a weekly basis, or frequenting the same coffee shop so that you can get to know the staff. Be thinking about what your front porch is and making the most of that. We even realized in our church building that we could literally be using our front lawn better. So we redesigned our front lawn. We had a lot of people, we were in a neighborhood, a lot of people walking past. And so we redesigned so that we'd have better outdoor seating for people to just, take a seat as they were walking past our church. Think about those front porch places in your home life and then also in your community's life. There can be front porch places that you as a church do together as well, serving people and meeting people outside your doors. Lastly, as we're building relationships, we need to think about people's lack of community. That it was Mother Teresa who said the greatest sort of depravity right now that people experience is just simple loneliness. And that is so true. So we're the church, we're connected as a body, we're a family. All of the metaphors about the church show that we do not lack community. If we lack community, we're not acting like the church. So we need to correct that. But what can our church do in building relationships? In the book, The Strategically Small Churches, the author talks about how truly hospitality is the number one thing a small church congregation can do in its work of evangelism and outreach and mission, because it's what you naturally do together as a smaller congregation. And the ACNA is made up of a lot of small congregations that I feel are very highly strategically placed to be able to offer hospitality. We saw this happen in our church community in a small group that adopted a couple who the wife was on bed rest for several months. And they just made a pact, like, we'll make sure that this family gets like a couple meals every week for the duration that she's on bed rest. Then when the baby was born, they continued those meals. And this couple finally, after several months, came to that small group. And then after several months of coming to that small group, ended up coming into the church. This couple, neither of them had grown up in any kind of a church context before. But it was that hospitality that was the invitation for building community and welcoming them in. People want to feel a part of things. So we can think about our hospitality and where we see that coming to be. Just even be thinking about how we do it together. Like, you may see a need that needs hospitality, and you might not have the bandwidth to really take care of that need. That's what we do together. So we're a church community that offers hospitality together. And I would say, like, even as you think about maybe having something at your home, do it with someone else. We always have a big Christmas Eve event at our house, but we host it with another couple. And so then as they invite people and we invite people, we know we're doing it together. Think about that in your life and think about that in the life of your church. I just also want to say that kids really need to see this. Like, this is when people ask, how do we keep our kids in the church? This is one of the ways we keep our kids in the church, is that the hospitality they see in their home, they also see in their church. It's another way of integration, of being the family of God. And it makes a really big impact on kids to see those expressions of hospitality just being like, this is just what we do. This is what we do together, and they're part of it. Now, lastly, I just want to talk about practicing hospitality without grumbling. So I love that grumbling made its way into Scripture in reference to hospitality. Because, I mean, Scripture is just always true to life. And so we need to be thinking about hospitality without grumbling. And hospitality can really feel like a disruption. It can come in unexpected, and so all of a sudden you're confronted with a person who is in need, or that could be a stranger, or it could actually be a family member. And our readiness to have our lives disrupted is really low. So one of the practices with hospitality could be simply, as you wake up in the morning, say, Lord, may my day look like what you want it to look like. Because he may want you to be hospitable, and you weren't planning on that. So I think that some of the reasons why we grumble in hospitality is just a general tiredness that we are experiencing. So literally, you need to look at your calendar and be thinking through, what do I not need to do so that I have time for the unexpected? We also are timid, and that goes back to what we talked about last night. When we are timid about something, there is like this grumbling of like, oh, why would I be expected to do that? I've never done this before. I don't know if I want to show up for this. Timidity itself can lead to a grumbling. Our sense of our lack of resources leads to grumbling. Like, why am I expected to bring this or do all of that? And this is going to cost a lot of money, and I don't know if I can do that. But what I have seen of hospitality is that the Lord's supply of resources is far greater than what we think we're capable of. It's like that children's book, Stone Soup. It's like you contribute your little, and God makes it much. But grumbling... really, it's so obvious, like no one really wants to be with someone who's grumbling. And so you've just sort of, changed hospitality. Even if you're doing it, I'm being hospitable, but I'm also grumbling. You're not really being hospitable anymore. You're just sort of being annoying. So that we've got to monitor our own emotions, and really that's where we're asking the Lord, saying, through me, be hospitable to another. And through me, do this work. He provides all of the love that you need for someone. He provides all of the resources you need to taking care of a need, or his body provides those resources, so that we can offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. As it goes on to say, each of you should use whatever gift you've received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. And that's the key, that the grace is always sufficient. There's always enough of that grace to be hospitable. So as we're going to go into small group time, small groups are by kind of a mix-up situation. You'll get to know people in other churches. And when I said last night that last night was the kind of preparing our hearts, and then today is the work, you have work to do. So this is what I would love in those questions that you answer, especially that last question of who in your life, in your personal life or in the life of your church, that may need your hospitality, may need your offering of a drink, may need your recognition of their need. I want you to literally write down some names and be thinking, what could I do as my next step? How can I become more expectant and more prepared for that relationship that the Lord is wanting to invite me into? So you have plenty of time to answer those questions, but make sure that there's some plan of action at the end that you're sharing in your group with others. And as you have time, pray about that. Pray that the Lord would remove any grumbling from your heart, but would give you an expectation and even a joy as you seek to show hospitality. So let me pray for you as we move into groups. Our Heavenly Father, we just are so thankful that you sent us your Son, and your Son has given us all that we need. that we lack nothing, that your grace is sufficient for us. And as we think, Lord, of opening up our homes, our hearts, our churches to others, I pray that you would show us how you'll be there with us, that this is something that we get to do with you. So, Lord, even as we think about Mary sitting at your feet and learning from you, I pray that this small group time has that sense that you are in the room, and as we speak to each other, we are also learning from you. So teach us, Lord, your ways. Apply your teachings to our life. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.